I'm Maureen Metcalf, your host for Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future. I'm also the founder and CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute, where we help leaders be future ready. Today, we welcome Chris Nolan, multi-Emmy Award winner, writer, director, and author, and Michael Schindler, writer and host of Military Wire podcast. They teamed up to co-write and produce the groundbreaking documentary, It's VUCA, The Secret of Living in the 21st Century. Chris and Mike, your insights on anti-fragile confidence will help our listeners be future ready. So we thank you for joining us again, because we've done multiple podcasts with you. So let's jump into the topic. What is anti-fragile confidence and why do I care about it?
We have about 10 courses in our VUCA Max program. And one of those courses is called, is the VUCA Max Masterclass. One of those cohorts is called Anti-Fragile Resilience.
What's VUCA?
VUCA is a term that's been around for about 30 years. And it was coined by the U.S. Military about the conditions of the late 20th century, which were volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So VUCA Max is where we are now, because we still have those VUCA conditions, but we also have something called massive, accelerating, exponential change, which means things are doubling. They're doubling in intensity. Things are getting, as you said, as you can see, the future is moving faster than we think. So what we mean by doubling is that at one time, maybe it seemed like every year was, well, kind of like the last year. But now it feels like, boy, like 10 years have gone by, right? Every year. And that's this doubling era that we're in. And so what that means is, to put it in context, in the next 10 years, we will see 100 years of change this century. And in the next 80 years, we'll see 200,000 years of change. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what's happening with technology and with AI and with all the converging, forces that we have in our environment right now.
Which is a great lead-in, Chris, to answering Maureen's first question, which is, what the heck is anti-fragile resilience or anti-fragile confidence, right? I mean, the resilience piece, Maureen, that's where you think about the tennis ball and the egg, right? People being fragile. If they're an egg and you slam that down on the concrete, it explodes, it breaks. When people are resilient, we talk about bouncing back, but bouncing back into what you were before, right? So you go through a traumatic event, but you're able to bounce back. You're still the shape of that tennis ball. Well, when you talk about anti-fragile, you're reshaping. Yes, you're bouncing back, but you're bouncing back into a different shape, different environment, better, stronger, but not the same because the environment's changed. And so when we talk about resilience, when Chris and I started talking about this, it really was, it's a confidence that you understand that you'll be able to go through a moment coming out stronger, better. Doesn't mean it's not going to hurt going through it. But when you're talking about anti-fragile confidence, it's going, okay, I know I'm going to bounce back, but I'm going to bounce back better, stronger in a different environment because, to Chris's point, things are changing. So you can't bounce back to the same because the environment's not the same.
That's right. And so really, anti-fragile is the opposite of fragile.
Mm-hmm.
So what Mike's talking about is, as you can see, we live in an environment where a lot of people are really fragile right now. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of emotional trauma. So this VUCA Max world can make you break easily, right? So how do you have anti-fragile confidence in this environment? And so anti-fragile confidence takes anti-fragility, which is a quote from Nicholas Taleb, who came up with it's an economic term about fragility in our environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the idea here is that anti-fragile confidence comes together. It's a trust in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have a trust in yourself? And this is Anti-fragile confidence is an intense trust in yourself, right? That you have what it takes to overcome and navigate anything that this VUCA Max world throws against you.
Which takes a little effort. I mean, to be honest, because some people don't even trust where they put their keys, right? I mean,
Right.
Maureen, you're walking around going, I don't even know where I left those.
And some tools that we're going to show you coming up.
So I was talking to a CEO yesterday about the people he hires and the environment he's creating. And this was exactly what he was pointing to. We expect our people to be able to shift quickly to the changing environment. There are certainly values that they adhere to, trust, delivering high quality service, and creating an exceptional customer journey. But how that happens, especially with the advent of drones and AI in their industry, the employees themselves will need to change quickly. And I love how, Mike, you framed that we have to bounce back differently, because the CEO was saying, I don't want people who need a level of stability. I want people who are able to push themselves all the time. And to do that, we have to have confidence that we won't break at some point. And also, and this was part of his values, is the team is here to support you. We're not throwing you out on your own to go figure stuff out, but we will have your back. And I think that, given your background, that's also something that you can speak to, that the team is crucial in helping build this kind of confidence that, yes, in fact, I'm going to make it through this change and the next change and the next change. It's not that I'm going to make it through today. Every day is the slowest day of the rest of my life. So with that accelerating change, if I fall across the finish line tonight, am I going to be able to get up and do more tomorrow?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is a lot of business. This is the slowest day of the rest of my life, unfortunately. Or actually, no, it seems like it. I mean, you probably got more work than you need, but then there's another part of it that just feels kind of like, routine.
Yeah, but I think what you said was so important. Like, the team environment is so important, right? And that comes from leadership. So if a team knows that they can trust the environment, they can trust their leader, maybe not the environment, because the environment's shifting and changing quickly, right? But if they know, listen, the leader's got my back, then I can trust that and I can fail forward. And I think that's important. Sometimes we get so caught up in not living on the edge of our comfort zone, or not being willing to take that next step because we're afraid of what the repercussion would be. But if we know that listen, you own the problem, you own the solution, we'll figure it out, we'll keep moving forward. That's the micro win piece. Chris and I talk a lot about this. Micro wins are so important when you're looking at today's environment. It's, if you do anything like a plank, right? And people are like, I'm going to do a 3-minute plank. And then they get, 15 seconds into it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I have 2 minutes and 45 seconds left. They start thinking like that's a long goal. But if they start thinking and like, hey, I can do this for 10 seconds at a time, and they just start talking themselves in 10 seconds. I did this with the song. I found a 7-minute song. I put it in my ears and I held the plank for 7 minutes. Right?
Is that While I Survive, Mike? Is it?
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to remember who sang that song. It was a funky song, but the whole point is, you just have to take things. You've got to distract your mind, keep yourself focused on the goal, and just take it in micro wins. We can stretch ourselves 40% more than what we think is we hit the wall, right? I hit the wall, can't keep going. Our body and our mind can actually go, no, guess what? I've got a reserve tank. You can go about 40% more.
But this is the thing that we get. I mean, with most of our clients, this is like the number one thing is anti-fragile resilience or anti-fragile confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's a team thing, but especially with return to work, it's a big deal. How do they keep up their resilience given, things like AI? Is AI going to take my job? But I think what we'll get into is that it has a lot to do with, we call this a VUCA Max warrior system. There's actually some kind of ancient philosophy that it's, right out of the ninja warriors or Japanese Ikadu or something like that, where it's a philosophy of living too. That's a big part of this that we don't really have in our culture right now.
How would your clients go about building anti-fragile resilience? Because you've made a brilliant case that we all need it. And this level of confidence, the resilience and the confidence combined, that I'm going to be able to do this tomorrow. Because if we look at the level of anxiety, depression, drug use, all up. So this seems like an opportunity to help people counterbalance the challenges that they're facing.
Well, I'll let Mike get into this because he's great. I mean, there's a military aspect to this that I'll set Mike up and he'll take this home. That there's and when I mentioned kind of an ancient philosophy here, it's the idea of mind, body, spirit, where you have to have a foundation that you're right on with this, Maureen, with the idea of how we kind of have a koyana about how we go about things. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of not having when Mike talks plus ones, he's also talking about foundational plus ones. Sleep, nutrition, energy, your chi, as we say, or your prana or your ki, whatever that's called, right? Weaving together these negative and positive aspects of our life. In fact, Abraham Maslow talks about either you're going -1 every day or with every decision, or +1 every day with every decision. And we call these plus ones. So you have to look at yourself and saying, when you're talking about stress or, drugs or drinking too much, those are all -1s. And -1s, like +1s, compound. So if you're doing +1 foundations, getting enough sleep, getting enough nutrition, getting enough energy, all of those good things, then that's compounding into your anti-fragile confidence. And that leads right into, Mike, I'm sure you'll take off on this, is what Jocko Willink says. There is freedom in discipline.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, people think that, boy, being disciplined takes a lot of work. It does take some work, but when you're so disciplined, there's freedom in that. And let me explain that. It really comes down to, Chris and I coined this term called purposeful presence. So when you think, in the military, we're really good at painting mission, purpose, identity, right? Purpose is help save the world from bad people. Mission is commander's intent. What am I doing on a daily basis? My identity is, what's my rank, my uniform, things along that line. So you're focused on the purpose, and that's where, whether it's return to work or return to culture, or whether it's people living their daily lives, it's really, what is my purpose? What is my purposeful presence? So I'm in the moment. And so that really goes back to a quote, when the vision is big, the circumstances don't matter, because people will do things that are super important to them, right? And that comes down to self-worth or self-image. And so how do you get there? That's where, when Chris and I go into companies where we're working with individuals, we always start to what Chris's point is the core values. Really, what is the core of the company? What is the core of the individual? Because that is how you get people to embrace discipline. Because if it's important to them, they'll figure out how to do it, right? I mean, any of us that have ever raised kids, we'll see it. They'll do things that we think are extraordinary, even though there might be fear attached to it, because it's really important to them. We'll do things in the film industry that are groundbreaking. That's what we did when we did the first film during COVID. We're like, I don't know how this is going to work. And we're like, well, let's just give it a shot. And we found new ways to film, and we found new ways to record, and we found new ways to edit, and we found it, but we had a big vision. And that's the piece, is when the vision is big, all of a sudden the discipline happens. The short story here, when I was in college, this is before cell phones. I told my grandparents I was going to come down.
They have phones, Mike.
They did have phones, and they were attached to the wall. But
okay.
I told my grandparents I was going to come visit, and I didn't get down on a Saturday like I told him, but I got down on a Sunday. So I showed up a day late. And my grandfather's like, hey, you didn't show up yesterday. And I said, well, I got busy with, college, et cetera. And I said, I tried to call, but nobody answered. And he goes, well, you told me you'd be here on a Saturday. And I had plans for us on a Saturday. And I said, well, it's Sunday. We can do those plans now. And he goes, what's interesting? If it was worth $1 million to you, you would have been here on Saturday. And I just went, wow, that's crazy. But he wasn't wrong, right? And that's what happens. So we all as a human or a company have something that's worth $1 million, use that term, whatever is so important to us that we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. That's how you form discipline, right? So that's purposeful presence.
Right. Yeah. It's very powerful. Purposeful presence is a big idea today because they want people to go back to work. Right. And so it's a responsibility of both the company and the employee to make that presence purposeful, because you can't just say, well, come back and just sit in front of your computer and we won't talk to you for 8 hours every day again, because then they lose their mojo. But this is really important. I mean, even with kids or anybody, this discipline thing is a really big deal because it's paradoxical, right? I mean, you go, wait a minute, discipline, freedom, they seem like they're counter to each other. But Eric Fromm is a sociologist and a philosopher and a psychologist. And he said there's a difference between negative and positive freedom. And it's about free will, right? It's about choice. So you would think that freedom means I can do anything I want. It's just, but it's like we have this good and bad VUCA. I'd mentioned the bad VUCA. There's a good VUCA, which is vision, understanding, clarity, and adaptability. So those are the positive sides of VUCA. The thing is that people don't realize, they don't understand that free will, if it's negative, has no rules or boundaries. So if it has no rules or boundaries, it can get into things like insecurity and depression and anxiety, because there's no constraint there. You're not giving yourself anything back. Like, I did this, right? I made good choices.
Right. The phrase we use is liberating structure. That the structure itself gives me freedom because I know what my guardrails are. I know what my expectations are. It's not you can do anything, to your point, absolute freedom, but that the structure, if created properly with the right understanding, aligned with purpose, helps me be more effective. And that structure also allows me the stability from which to change. It can be the ground that the ball, Mike, is bounced on.
Right.
Or
yeah, exactly. As Mike was saying, if it's a +1, if it contributes to your well-being, you understand that that's actually increasing your power. If it's negative, it's making you powerless, and too much negativity.
I mean, it really is defining, like, if you had your best year, like even from an individual standpoint, I'll just take from an individual standpoint, Maureen, is, if you had your best year mentally, physically, spiritually, relationally, financially, do you know what that looks like? And can you measure it? Right? So then everything that you do in your life, you essentially process and ask the question, how is what I'm doing right now helping me move the needle in these 5 areas? Is it moving me forward in those 5 areas, or is it moving me backwards? Oh, wow, I had 4 donuts. Well, that's not helping me move the needle in a positive direction physically, right? Might be helping me mentally for the moment because, I'm stressed out and, I eat when I get stressed. But how's it? So you really want to design your life in a way that's like, okay, what are the things I'm doing that are helping me move the needle in these 5 areas? From a company standpoint, it's like, how am I improving morale? And how is what we're doing improving profits? And what most companies miss today, which I think is pretty fascinating, and you see this today, is most companies are so focused on profits, which is not wrong at all. However, how you improve profits is by improving morale. So when you improve morale, the vision is big. all of a sudden people get excited. That's the moonshot that Chris and I talk about, is when they paint that moonshot, people become excited. They'll become more efficient. They'll get more creative in their thinking on how to solve problems. And they'll be like, wait a second, if I could solve this problem faster, better, it adds to the bottom line. And I feel like I'm adding value. Companies today have unfortunately separated that oftentimes, when really they are a parallel path, that when we focus there, the people will see increased profits, and you'll start to see a decrease in the mental issues and some of the other ailments that go on in society.
Mike, I think companies are too focused on profits these days. I think that they, even in the 70s and before, they were still focused on profits, but there was a bigger value system.
Oh, 100%.
I don't think that they focus on culture as much as they should.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, no, I think they're way too focused on, I don't want to say too focused on profits, but they're
very stockholder oriented rather than stakeholder oriented.
Agreed.
One other thing I would say also about discipline that's really, really important is that, and we have a tool coming in, if we get to it today, that deals with this. It's about avoidance. It's called the Bring It On tool. We'll take you through if we get to it. But discipline defeats excuses, and it defeats avoidance, right? And that's a big deal. That's because excuses are what thwart you from moving forward. It thwarts a forward progress, which is what we all want to be part of.
Yeah, as you say that, I think of what we're doing with yoga. So body, mind, spirit. Yoga happens to be one of the things I choose.
No, that's great.
While I have not been maniacally disciplined about exercise in my life, I've always exercised, but now it's almost maniacal. And that discipline really is helping me have the foundation, as you're saying, to adapt to changes that are happening that I can't control. And I need to have the capacity to manage myself through the changes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of, like we said, there's a lot of Eastern philosophy behind a lot of this stuff. Your Qi and Qigong and all those kinds of things that, are align yourself, balance yourself. Once again, that's the foundational plus ones.
And thank you. I wanted to draw that back to, with the plus ones, then we have the capacity to absorb and metabolize some of the change that's happening.
Yeah,
so let's talk about Bring It On.
It helps you keep on track.
Yeah.
Right.
So then let's go to, what is the Bring It On tool?
The Bring It On tool. Maybe we should do the 3 anti-fragile disciplines first, because that will lead into the Bring It On.
What are the 3 anti-fragile tools?
3 anti-fragile disciplines. It's interesting because these all do align with each other. So these are all based on one of our mentors and one of our tentpole gurus in the VUCA Max program, Phil Stutz. So I went to Phil Stutz for about 10 years. He had a documentary was made about him with Jonah Hill made a documentary. He's on Netflix called Stutz, and he has all these tools, and he's really a remarkable guy. And he has these 3 structures, these 3 disciplines of anti-fragility. And I'll set them up, and then I'll let Mike fill in on some of these. There's the first one, which is structural discipline, which we just talked about, which is what you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, how you're in a constant rhythm, how you get out of a lethargic state, right? How you, it's your daily living. And it's really important about a lot of these to understand that your ego will not like any of these.
Mm-hmm.
Your ego will not like structural discipline. Like, you've got to get up and you've got to exercise, you've got to meditate, you've got to chant, you've got to journal, any of those things that keep you into a structural discipline. And the next one I'll let Mike talk about, which is reactive discipline. Now, this is very important because we actually have 2 tools that really expand on reactive discipline, which is the VUCA Max, which is part of VUCA Max conscious leadership and VUCA Max anti-fragile resilience. And that's called the VUCA Max line.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, I'll let you talk about reactive discipline.
Yeah. So reactive discipline is really, so there's response and reaction, right? So response is you're taking a moment to understand, really thinking second, third order effects, so thinking kind of chess playing your decision-making process, right? Like if I make this decision, then, I'm thinking through what that decision is going to be, as opposed to a reaction. And when we talk about reactive discipline, it really is being below the line. It's allowing the fear, the guilt, the anxiety, the things that we often say are the uncontrollables, the things, the external environment. We react to it. We push against it without thinking through it. And there is a discipline in that, in the sense that oftentimes people operate out of that. So when Chris is talking about, moving forward or moving backwards, people are disciplined in some form. It's either positive or negative, right? Some people are like, hey, listen, I eat every day and I eat a pound cake every day. Well, that's discipline.
Well, Mike, it's 95% of people are living in an unconscious
100%
mindset.
They are. Yeah. They really are. And so the goal is, when you talk about the VUCA line, is getting people to move into an awareness state. Where am I? So anytime a situation happens, it's really taking that pause, that 60-second pause. Remember when your mom used to say, or maybe your moms didn't do this, but my mom did this, is anytime I was being a teenage boy, she'd look at me and she'd say, give me a minute. And I knew at that moment that if I did not give my mom a minute, I might be meeting Jesus in the next 60 seconds. So it is really about slowing the roll, in that when you give your brain a moment to pause as opposed to react, you can suddenly start making smarter decisions. And that pulls you into an awareness state that then allows you to acknowledge where you're at and then take action in a positive sense. So
right. And below the line is a survivor mode. It's actually a victim mode more. Above the line is a creative mode. So below the line, you're in a negative state. Okay. And at the above the line, you're in an expansive state. You can actually think of it, if you're in a spiritual concept here, you're in your lower self below the line. You're in your higher self above the line. And the reason we call this conscious leadership is a lot of leaders are walking around, 95% of them, dealing with past beliefs, past baggage, past blame, past anxieties. And you have to throw all past judgments. You have to throw all of that out to be above the line. If your listeners are probably familiar with Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And as Mike was saying, there's this space between stimulus and response, Viktor Frankl would said, and that we have the power to choose how we think, right? And that response is what gives us our growth and our freedom. If we don't make that, we're going backward.
And in that pause, and Chris, I know you talk about this, is also engaging the breath, helping our nervous system relax. Because if I'm in fight and flight mode, I am going to be in victim mode. I actually have to shift my brain and my physiology to have the capacity to move out of the below the line state.
Mike calls that the 60-second lifesaver, right, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It really is that. What you're doing is you're moving your system from the from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic. And it really is, that's 60 seconds. Like, your listeners, if they just think, I know some of your listeners had a mom that said, give me a minute. I know that. And you know what? Our moms were brilliant when they said it. They didn't know they were doing this, but they were slowing their action down because they knew my reaction might not be good. You might.
Mike heard this a lot, by the way.
I did. Like, I was that troubled youth. So it is a lifesaver. And if we can execute our lives just take a minute, right? No decision. I mean, unless you're jumping in front of a car, right? But most decisions in our life, you can take a minute. You can slow down and go, let me take a minute, because you're going to move out of reaction and you're going to move yourself into response.
Yeah, it's huge for teams and leadership.
Oh
and,
my
and
gosh.
you know, and for because so many people are into knee-jerk reactions, and that's just taking that 60 seconds is huge.
We teach this in communication as well. When you are in that fight and flight mode in the midst of a conversation, in negotiation, to be able to say, I need a minute, to slow the heartbeat, slow the breathing, allow everyone to recalibrate, and ask myself in that minute, what outcome do I want from this situation? So re-engage my intention. And if I want to then say, the outcome we're moving toward isn't what I'm looking for, I'm trying to create a positive interaction here, to be able to then voice, hey, it feels like we're off track. How do we move back to this purpose for this conversation?
Yeah,
or whatever decision happens in my head at that moment.
Yeah, and you're moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset immediately. And that's why we're saying it's about critical decision making. All of a sudden now you're in a clear, creator mode. So it's pretty powerful.
And then what's the third discipline?
The third one is Stutz called it expansive discipline. I think Mike and I like to call it exponential discipline in this particular age. It's actually, this is why it leads into the Bring It On tool. It's action steps that force you to expand your life. So the universe is constantly expanding. And to get into that flow, it's about flow and connect to higher forces. We have to keep up with that forward moving progress. Think of it even day, which is why we call it exponential discipline. You have to actually move yourself faster. You have to really get into this flow quicker. And what that takes is courage. And this is what the Bring It On tool really, really leads into, because there's a lot of fear in our age right now. So this is about when you're avoiding or when you're making excuses, a lot of times you're facing fear. How do you get over that fear and say, bring it on? And that leads into Mike Schindler explaining the Bring It On tool.
The Bring It On tool. Well, the Bring It On tool is great, actually. I mean, it really is. You visualize, let's just take public speaking, because most people don't like public speaking, right? Because really, the core is, I'm afraid of what people are going to say or think about how I deliver what I'm about to say or share. Right. So they become inner focused as opposed to what can I give to others. Right. So they have this fear of public speaking. So the Bring It On tool is you visualize, that thing that you're fearing most. Okay. You visualize it. I'm speaking up on stage in front of 1,000 people. Oh my gosh. You feel the anxiety building, but you're like, no, I embrace this. Like, bring it on. So you start to visualize you on that stage and you're breaking through this cloud almost. I think Chris in some ways describes it even more beautiful than I do, but I see it. You're going, no, bring it on. You're visualizing every part of the success of this. Okay. And you're addressing the fears that you have, but you're like, no, bring that on, bring it on. I embrace it. Bring it on. I love fear. I love this. And you start to shout it, and you do it probably in the comfort of your own home. I would not, or your car. Like, people don't know what's going on in your car. It's okay. You can do it in traffic too. Keep your eyes open. But you visualize this so that you break through that moment and you go, I can do this. Bring it on. So what Chris and I oftentimes do is we take a moment where we're like, this could be pretty overwhelming. Chris is really good even at helping me sometimes get regrounded. It's just like, you got this. Just bring it on. Okay, great. Okay. But you're really visualizing yourself breaking through what's holding you back. And you're saying, no, bring that to me. Bring that to me.
Right. It's once again, So I don't know if I finished this, but Stutz was known as basically the shrink to the stars. I mean, you name a big actor, director, head of a studio, probably a Stutz client. And I went to him because I'm a film director, and I had similar situations where I'd have 100 people on a crew and something would go wrong. And, there's a lot of anxiety when you're in those situations, right? And so he was very helpful with that. So the Bring It On tool, as Mike was very apropos said, you're on stage. So we dealt with a lot of actors. And actually fear must be equated to pain. That's really what happens when you get high anxiety. It becomes extremely painful. And so what Stutz told you to do is to imagine that you focus on that pain. And you say, bring on that pain, bring on that fear. You see it in front of you as a cloud, right? And you actually you scream like, I love pain. I love it. And you keep moving forward. And as you move through the pain, it spits you out into a higher force. And that higher force is anti-fragile confidence, because you've done that. You've achieved that. You've gone through that. And this is the kind of it's the things that the Navy SEALs do and the elite forces do. They force themselves through these situations. They go, oh, okay, I've done that. And they have this inner discipline, this inner feedback. And you want to do that every single time throughout the day that you feel anxiety or overwhelm, whatever, or you can't call somebody. You say, I should really call them, but what if they say no or they reject me? Call them. Bring it on. So it moves. What this does is this puts you into forward motion. And that's, once again, that third, we call it exponential expansiveness, where it pushes you forward into flow.
Well, and Chris, when you talk about that, think about those things that you have in your own life where you're like, man, I'm afraid of doing that. But then you do it. You take that first step. Don't you feel such a rush? Like you get a big dopamine hit from it, right? You're like, man, I did it. It could be something so small like Dan or Chris or me, guys, when we used to have to pick up the phone and call girls to ask them out to a dance. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to call the girl, right? And you'd pick up the phone and she'd answer and you'd like hang up real quick. And then you'd pick up the phone again and right. You'd finally be like, hey, do you want to go to the dance? And go, oh yeah, I'll go to the dance. Right. It's just those small little actions. I'm hoping Chris doesn't make some snide comment.
No.
Going to the dance.
No, you're right. I mean,
but that's what it is, right? It's the small victories.
Well, they're small, but sometimes the consequences of, I'll give you an example. Like I'm in Mexico shooting for Google, and we have 100 people on a crew, a lot of money every day being spent. We have Mexican federales threatening it. Well, they did a few times where they go, well, you're not going to be able to shoot that in the morning, right? You're not going to, and maybe an actress on a TV show is some drug-related or alcohol-related situation, she can't perform, or we lose a location. These are monstrous things that, you have to, because you're dealing with a studio, you're dealing with a client, you're doing a lot of money, and you're going, and you have to keep your gyroscope. And how do you do that? And if there's actually almost a comforting factor. I almost said a sense of humor factor, or if you're saying bring it on, it's just a different way of looking at it. It's a different mindset.
Yeah, 100%.
You're going, oh, well, if we lose that, if it rains like buckets, well, we'll try to shoot and we'll do this. You're not, you're moving forward. You're not freaking out. You're making conscious decisions. I mean, it's huge for leaders.
Oh, it's huge.
It's huge for innovation, because innovation's risky and it's scary. And you've got a lot of people and you've got stakeholders and stockholders saying, well, what are you spending that money on? Oh, we're doing this experimental thing over here. Think about Steve Jobs with the iPhone, right? What are you doing? You're trying to reinvent the phone. You're spending all this money. They just spent $10 billion on a car that they kiboshed. Well, good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's something new that comes out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we wrap up, I love the idea that you've talked about the three the three anti-fragile disciplines from Stutz and the Bring It On tool that anyone can do that helps me then build the confidence. When I get below the line, how do I do this? When I get below the line, how do I take the minute, take the breath, move from the sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, recalibrate, and then when I am out of the situation, practice bringing it on, hopefully before I go into a situation so I don't go below the line, but we all have those moments. So you've given us two really helpful tools that people can walk away with and do today.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
We have another thing we didn't get to that is really powerful too. And Mike's huge into this, which is the plus ones and minus ones. We actually have a list of what we call superpowers, plus one superpowers and minus one kryptonites.
Yeah, but we'll save that for the next show. I mean,
what's that?
Yeah.
We could do another show on those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important, Maureen, that we focus on the things that we can control. Right. And, Bring It On, to Chris's point, is a great, like when people get hit in the face, sometimes, there's an Army term that says sometimes you get the bear, sometimes the bear gets you. It really is, you just say, bring it on. Right. Now, there was a period of my life where I'd say, put it on my tab. Right. So I'd have a lot of bad things that happen. I'd just put it on my tab. But Bring It On is so much better because it's like, bring it on. Because it puts you into solution mode. And that's the secret to it, as opposed to put it on my tab, which is I'll just deal with that later. But Bring It On really is, now I got to operate. I got to figure out how to operate through this. So.
And it's often not as complex or as emotionally challenging as we perceive it will be.
Correct.
Just our brains are wired to help us stay alive. And that means amplifying risk.
Yeah. It loops back to where Mike was talking about with it. It's really not looking at it as failure.
That's right.
You actually give yourself credit for just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of forward motion versus trying to put it in a category of win or lose, because it's really not how life works. You don't know sometimes that something that was a negative turns out to be a positive. It's like we have a thing called the OODA loop, which is about assumptions, another tool. If you're in an assumption mode, that's a good way to get your fighter plane shot down.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Where would people find out more about you and about the VUCA Max training and learn about the full suite of tools?
They can visit itsvuca.com, itsvucamax.com. These are the primary areas that they should visit. If they want to watch the movie, they can go to, Amazon or Apple TV, and, it's VUCA, The Secret to Living in the 21st Century. But itsvuca.com is where they can find all the tools and some of the great teachings and trainings that we do. And some of those we offer for free. Some of those are out there in the ether that are available. And we just encourage people to just really take ownership. Like, we've got one life. Like, I guess that could be another podcast too. Some people might want to debate that, but what we know is we have this moment. So let me start there. We have this moment, and how are you going to own the moment to move your life forward and help other people move forward? Because that's really what this is about. It is, how does your presence give other people purpose? How does it give you purpose? But how does it make it really a better world? And that's what really Chris and I are about, is helping people achieve a better world, starting with their own world.
Yeah. I also say stay tuned for, we have about 10 courses that we're releasing, a whole VUCA Max program. We think we call it, it's a VUCA Max. I think it's the future of coaching, was it the future of
leadership and coaching? Yeah.
Leadership and personal development.
Yeah.
The future of leadership and personal development. And we have 10 courses, we'll have, stay tuned for that. Also, we have a book called The Rise of Humanists, the VUCA Max System for Expanding Human Agency in the Age of AI, which is all about those superpowers and kryptonites that hold you back.
Brilliant. Thank you. So listeners have a lot of ways to access and learn from you.
We'll put links in the notes.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our listeners for navigating the volume of change and building your own anti-fragile confidence so that you are able to enjoy this journey.
Thank you.